military hardware has accelerated significantly over the past several years. And China was also a key supporter of Pakistan as it developed its nuclear capabilities. And so reportedly, right, we're still seeing actual confirmation come through on this, but certainly Pakistan at this point is claiming that it used some of those Chinese assets to apparently down Indian French origin fighter jets. Again, I really want to emphasize that this is still pending confirmation. The fog of war is thick, as they say, but on the Indian side, they have a mix of military hardware, a great portion of which actually comes from Russia. India and Russia have a long-standing defense relationship, but in recent years, India has also been diversifying and bringing in more military equipment from countries like France, like Israel, and of course from the US as well. And so this is a situation, really one of the first of its kind, where we've seen Chinese origin hardware go up against some Western origin hardware, maybe some Ukraine parallels there, but I think it's something certainly to keep an eye on, and that will have broader impacts for defense planners thinking about the Indo-Pacific and potential military conflict with China down the road.
So some useful information there on the balance of the two forces, Susie. Now tell us about the balance of the two nuclear arsenals. What do we know? Both countries are very secretive, aren't they?
They are very secretive, but fortunately, there's a lot of information available through satellite imagery, through different research that people have done, and I give a lot of credit to the Federation of American Scientists, who publishes the most definitive look at these arsenals. We know that both India and Pakistan have the ability to deliver nuclear weapons by air, land, and sea. Neither of them have a very strong component on the sea-based delivery. Pakistan's more to show, it's understood, but India is working on a second nuclear-armed submarine. But the thing that I worry about most are the missiles. And they both have a wide range of types of missiles. Some short range that go, 60 kilometers up to longer range missiles up to 5,000 kilometers. And India in particular has been working on developing a new series of these missiles, but both have invested significantly in their arsenals over the last few years. And what we find is that India spends maybe $2.5 billion a year on their arsenal, while Pakistan spends about $1 billion a year on their nuclear arsenal. They've invested significantly in increasing the capabilities of those arsenals, and that's always something to keep an eye on.
So Dan, would you say these two countries are in a nuclear arms race?
Yes, I think that's fairly obvious. You can trace specific programs that they have where one is either trying to match the other side or counter it. So for as an example of matching, Pakistan is trying to match India in the capability to put multiple and independently targeted warheads onto its missiles. India seems to have developed that capability. Pakistan is a bit behind. In terms of countering each other, as Susie was just saying, the Pakistan nuclear capability is quite missile heavy. We think that there are about 170 warheads in the Pakistan arsenal, and about 126 of those are on missiles. India's response is to have procured a Russian surface-to-air missile defense system. Get away from saying that there is a nuclear arms race at the moment. The arsenals are not large by global standards. 170 warheads each is a bit smaller than Britain's, that's smaller than France's, it's smaller than China's, way, way smaller than either Russia or the USA. But these are nonetheless significant armed forces, nuclear forces, technologically sophisticated and capable, as Susie has been rightly emphasizing, of doing a huge amount of damage, not just to the area where they land, but more broadly within the region. And as the radioactive dust goes up higher into the atmosphere, then it can move around the world and do further damage.
Elizabeth, what do we know in both countries about who can order a nuclear strike? Who has the launch codes?
Yeah, it's a great question, and one that, again, as some of the others are saying, we don't have a great deal of clarity on the specific kind of nuclear football equivalent, right? The way that this works in the US is there's always an aide following around the president who has those launch codes. But in both sides, there are some interesting parallels, but also distinctions. So in India, civilian control is paramount. And so we see a stronger role for the civilians, or at least believe that to be the case in decision-making on nuclear issues, though obviously any decisions would be taken as part of a broader meeting that includes India's chiefs from across the armed forces. On the Pakistan side, Pakistan's military is hugely influential, and the army in particular. And so there are, of course, specific sections of Pakistan's armed forces that are charged with maintaining and building up its nuclear deterrent. And in Pakistan, the understanding is it's what's called the National Command Authority that would meet, of course, chaired by the Prime Minister, but with a strong presence of military officials, and ultimately take decisions on nuclear issues. And so, in fact, as part of some of the signaling, the symbolic language that these two sides will exchange during these sorts of crises, we will see, for example, Pakistan convening a meeting of its National Command Authority. And so it's worth watching closely, even that level of signaling, because there is an implicit association with potential nuclear use there.
Dan, we sometimes hear about the tactical use of nuclear weapons, tactical nukes as some sort of lesser evil. Are they?
No, in a word, I'm afraid not. Precisely because they're sometimes thought of as being a lesser evil, it makes them in some ways worse. It's arguable that one might think, a leader or a senior commander might think that this was a lesser option than a longer range missile strike. After all, you would not be hitting perhaps the capital, you would be hitting the local area where the combat is going on. But it opens the door to the next step up. And I think that one of the things to worry about in this is this idea that escalation is a process that one side or the other can control. It's actually really referred to as escalation originally because it's a process that might get out of hand. That's what the problem is. And Elizabeth just mentioned signaling, and people have talked and written for years about nuclear signaling and signaling with the use of nuclear weapons or with the deployment of nuclear weapons. The point is not what your intention is in the signal you think you're giving. The point is how it lands in the minds of the people on the other side. And then they think perhaps that this is, worse than you thought it was, so they escalate further. And you now think, wow, we did something really modest and they've hit back really hard. We need to show them that we're serious. And I think if there is a place in the nuclear arsenal where it might be most possible for there to be an ill-thought-through action and miscommunication and misinterpretation, it could well be in the shorter range nuclear weapons. I think the one sort of thing that I've been looking at, nuclear dilemmas and nuclear problems for decades now. And one of the kinds of weapons that most worried me was nuclear artillery. And thankfully, there is no nuclear artillery between Pakistan and India. That doesn't mean there's no risk, but perhaps the greatest temptation for using nuclear weapons is perhaps a little bit removed. But yeah, tactical nuclear weapons, not an easy option, not a soft version of nuclear use.
Susie, I'm sort of looking at this and also looking at the historical timing of this, because in 3 months' time, it will be the anniversary of the last time nuclear weapons were used at the end of World War II in Hiroshima and Nagasaki. And as you know, I know you were there in Oslo City Hall at the end of last year. I was there too when Nihon Hidankyo, the survivors of those attacks, were given the Nobel Peace Prize. Have we learnt any lessons at all?
I would like to think that we have, but that it's taken quite some time. Because if you think 80 years ago, nuclear weapons were invented, and they were invented, the first detonation was in July in New Mexico. And they were used twice in conflict, but they've been tested over 2,000 times. There are populations around the planet who are suffering the ill effects of the use and testing of nuclear weapons for the second generation, the third generation. One of the most profound things I thought in those events in Oslo was hearing not just from those who miraculously lived through that atomic bombing in August of 1945, but their children, and hearing how they too have suffered from those weapons. You would think that we have learned, and we have learned enough to reduce the total numbers. We have learned enough that nearly 100 countries are on board a comprehensive prohibition, the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons, outlawing anything to do with nuclear weapons forever.
But Susie, none of those that have
anything to do with nuclear weapons. Forever,
but Susie, none of those that have nuclear weapons have signed on to that, and that includes all the members of the UN Security Council. Dan, I mean, if you look at what happened in 1945, just compare for us. We don't know what could be used in any conflict. Let's hope there is no conflict. But compare that with the firepower that India and Pakistan have. What is?
I would say that both India and Pakistan, or each of them, has in the vicinity of 80 times more firepower than was unleashed on Hiroshima and Nagasaki combined. Of course, both of those attacks were deliberately on, or uses of the bombs, were deliberately on civilian targets, and so the towns, cities, and so the numbers of killed were then very high. But yes, the Hiroshima bomb is a modest size nuclear weapon in terms of the physical damage that it would do. As we've been saying, there are limitations to our knowledge about exactly what weapons India and Pakistan have, and some of them may be of a smaller nuclear yield, less power than the Hiroshima bomb. But they're in that vicinity of them, and they have 170 each, whereas the USA used 2 in 1945.
It's all very grim, Elizabeth. Try to give us something a little bit more optimistic at the end. Where do you see the possible off-ramps are? And briefly, which countries could potentially help mediate this?
Yeah, I think fundamentally the onus is on both India and Pakistan as parties to this crisis and potential conflict to recognize that neither has an interest in escalation. So both are facing security challenges, India from China, Pakistan from Afghanistan and threats on its western border. And there are also economic imperatives here. War is hugely costly, and Pakistan has only just stabilized its economy, while India is seeking to build its out and achieve a global role. And so with those interests in mind, I think this is an opportunity that we have now for both sides to take a step back, to recognize that enough has happened, enough has transpired, that this is a potential window of opportunity to step back from the brink. And I was pleased to see reports coming out that communication had been established between the national security advisors on both sides. And we're also seeing the U.S., Gulf countries working the phones, calls from restraint from China and Russia. And, I think in the bigger global picture right now, there is so much going on, strained bandwidth and crises around the world. And so the last thing that we need is the situation like this to escalate. And so my hope is that essentially cooler heads will prevail because this is a very precarious situation.
Thank you very much. Thank you to all our guests today on Inside Story, Dan Smith, Susie Snyder and Elizabeth Trelkeld. Al Jazeera continues its coverage of the latest developments from both India and Pakistan around the clock. If you want more context and analysis, please visit our website, aljazeera.com. If you have any comments on this issue, go to our Facebook page. That's facebook.com/AJ Inside Story, or post them on X, where we are at AJ Inside Story. From me, James Bays, and the production team here in Doha, please stay safe. Bye-bye for now.
In 1948, more than 700,000 Palestinians were forcibly expelled from their historic homeland. Today, Palestinians in Gaza are facing genocide, and the occupation of the West Bank is being violently entrenched. Stay with Al Jazeera as we mark 77 years of Nakba.
Hello, I'm Nick Clark in Doha. The top stories here on Al Jazeera. And cross-border attacks have been continuing for a third day along the line of control in Kashmir between India and Pakistan. Both sides accuse each other of escalating hostilities. Pakistan says Indian shelling overnight has killed at least 6 people in Pakistan-administered Kashmir. Bernard Smith has this report now.
There's not much left to salvage from this home in Indian-administered Kashmir, destroyed by Pakistani shelling overnight on Thursday. Villages on the Indian side of the line of control have been subjected to multiple attacks by drones and other munitions, according to India's military.
It's very tense. There's been heavy shelling. We saw projectiles flying through the sky. We sheltered in our homes. It's the first time I've ever seen anything like this in my life. It was a horrible sight, and people in Jammu and Kashmir are frightened.
India's army says Pakistani troops have been responsible for a series of ceasefire violations along the line of control. Normally bustling border towns, this is Poonch, are deserted. Residents have been told to stay in their homes.
So the situation is quite serious. There are many loud sounds heard during the night. We just want peace and calm. If the governments sit together and resolve things through dialogue, that would be a good thing. But if there is a war and conflict, then our countries will go back 100 years.
For Indian Kashmiri families displaced from villages along the line of control, a college has been turned into a temporary shelter. India and Pakistan have been exchanging fire since India's military targeted what it calls terrorist camps in retaliation for a deadly attack on tourists in Kashmir, which it blamed on Pakistan. Islamabad has denied involvement. It's the worst confrontation between the neighbours in more than 2 decades. Bernard Smith, Al Jazeera.
Sharif is in New Delhi for us.
Sleepless nights for many of the people living in villages in the border areas who were either woken up to the sound of shelling and who had to be evacuated in the thick of night. So it's many of them have moved to shelters around the area, but it's a loss of lives, it's a loss of livelihood, and many of them fear when they could come back to safety. While this is happening, the Interior Ministry is reviewing security across the country. The border security forces say they have killed 7 who they call terrorists and have caused considerable damage to a Pakistani post.
Let's hear now from Kamal Haider, who has more from Islamabad.
Many people are forced to leave the area. Others who have underground dugouts are able to go in on an emergency basis with their entire families once the shelling starts. So indeed, a serious situation there, but also reports that Pakistan has shot down 77 drones.
Russia is commemorating the 80th anniversary of the end of World War II with a military parade in Moscow. The event is drawing global attention with dozens of world leaders in attendance, including China's President Xi Jinping. Troops from Russia's allies, including China, Egypt, Vietnam, Myanmar, and several former Soviet states, have participated in the parade. The United States has hinted at a plan to restart deliveries of aid into Gaza, saying Israel will take part in providing security, but not distribution. It comes 3 months into Israel's blockade on the Gaza Strip.
Israel is not doing anything. We call upon the United Nations, we call upon every NGO, we call upon every government, especially those who have been saying, why don't you do something? Why isn't something being done? Well, something is being done. So we invite people who have been concerned about it to join in this process. I will be the first to admit it will not be perfect, especially in the early days. It's a logistical challenge to make this work and to make it work well.